we are rolling right into our next fabulous panel. So from one set of really inspiring speakers to another set. So after this, you'll have a little bit of a break, I hope. But anyway, we have 3 panelists for this particular panel, and so we got to hear about infrastructure needs and some really, inspiring ideas of social capital that might be created. So next, we are going to talk about business models and, innovative business models, legal tools and strategies, and then some financial considerations for working with our young, beginning, and small farmers. So my name is Martha Sullins. I'm an extension specialist here at Colorado State University, and I help to head our beginning farmer rancher business development program here, and I'm also a certified farm transition coordinator. So I am going to introduce our panel, and I think what we're going to do, we have one person we're beaming in from Durango because he had ranch work to do and couldn't travel to join us here in person. So he's going to be joining us on the screen. His name is Abe Ott, and so I will introduce Abe first. I'm hoping he's going to show, there he is. Hey there, Abe. Hi. So I will introduce Abe and then our next 2 panelists, and they will each provide, they've got some slides and some content that they would like to share with you, and then we'll open it up for some questions. So first, we'll start with Abe. So I would just like to introduce you because I have your bio here. So Abraham Ott is originally from Durango, Colorado. So that's where he's joining us from right now. He grew up working with his family on the James Ranch, which is a regenerative ranch with a wide range of enterprises. He studied economics, business, and education in college and has a passion for finding creative ecological and economic solutions while educating the next wave of land stewards. He has worked a wide variety of jobs from ditch digger and fence builder to consultant and ranch manager on ranches in New Zealand, California, and Colorado, ranging in size from 400 acres to 67,000 acres. He is known for his ability to adapt, problem solve, build strong relationships, and affect teams. So I'd like to welcome Abe all the way from Durango. So if we can give him a round of applause.
So as she said, I'm Abe from the James Ranch in Durango. So this is a photo of the ranch we took this winter. That's our main building there and the cliffs overlooking the ranch. So pretty nice spot. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to cover today, just briefly, we don't have a whole lot of time together, but some of the core enterprises on the ranch. What is JRA LLP and how does it work? How decisions are made and by who? How we have financed some of our projects, and then just some general best management practices we have identified. Next slide, please. So some of our core enterprises are our grass-fed beef operation, the artisan cheese, and raw milk dairy. Our Way Good pork, that's the pork business that we feed all of the whey to. That's the play on words there, Way Good. Our chickens and eggs, the James Ranch Grill, which serves all the food we produce, the James Ranch Market where people can buy directly from us, the gardens, which we do flowers and veggies out of, and then also some educational tours and agritourism. Next slide. So James Ranch Agriprises LLP is a limited liability partnership, which means that all of the direct siblings, there's 5 siblings that grew up on the ranch. My grandparents moved here in 1961, and had 5 kids who all grew up here. They all left and did different things over the years, and then now are all back in Durango and partners on the ranch. So the important thing about this is that James Ranch Agriprises, which owns the land and a lot of the major infrastructure, is insulated from family member enterprises. So say my brother who does the pork business is not doing well financially for some reason, that's not impacting James Ranch Agriprises directly because all of those businesses are separate and won't impact the main ranch. And then all businesses which require some portion of the ranch and infrastructure lease from James Ranch Agriprises. So the land that my brother uses for his pastured pork operation he pays back to James Ranch Agri-Prizes a certain percentage of the total lease on the land, and then that money is then put into improving infrastructure, new projects, etc. Next slide. And this is a video about, maybe the video will play, I don't know. We'll see if it does. But the video is about our delegated meeting process.
If there's something
I'll just-
that I really want or something that I see that really needs to be done, then I can bring that to the attention of the family by, either just sending out an email or by bringing it up as a topic at a family meeting.
I've always been really proud to be a part of the decision-making process as a youngster.
All the people being there and going over things and just the whole family being together working harmoniously.
We don't live here, but we always come to the meetings, and we may or may not understand fully what's going on, but I feel like the family does their best to keep us in the loop and explain things to us.
I was able to go to the family meeting, and that gave me the forum to say, you have a problem here, and I think I'm the solution. And it was a great thing to have everyone there to talk about it, and no one was feeling like they were left out of the decision.
I just remember being so empowered when, Granddad or Uncle Dan or, these people that I really look up to really valued my opinion on, topics.
Adults talk to us about legal issues or specific ranch management problems that, sometimes are really over our heads. I remember the conservation easement thing. I was just like,
No idea.
We have family meetings so we can decide what to do as a group.
So that was a fun video from quite a few years ago. You may have recognized someone in that one. That was me. I'm not sure how long ago, but that is talking about our delegated meeting process. So every quarterly we have all family meeting. So anyone that's on the ranch or people that are away doing other things, there's not all the grandkids are here right now. Those were all grandkids that you saw speaking. And we can then make decisions for James Ranch Agri-Prizes. At the end of the day, the general partners have the final say, but usually it's a consensus type of decision. So some of those roles are moderator, decision driver, coach, timekeeper, scribe, and host. And those rotate between different family members. I've been all of those at some point or another, and those help the meetings run super efficiently and keep the communication really effective. And that's the delegated meeting process is a very well-known process. Some of you may have participated in other organizations. And the last thing on this, as far as how we make decisions, is holistic context and holistic management. So sort of a decision-making framework. This is our holistic context or holistic goal. And you guys can read that if I'm not going to read it at you, but that is just an example of how we all create buy-in. So if you don't have buy-in from all of your decision makers or all of the people involved, then you're not going to succeed in getting anywhere. You can go to the next slide. So some of the finance options we've used, family, which is pretty unique to our situation. This is one to be careful with, but I just thought I'd put it on there for transparency. So for example, my parents borrowed from my grandparents when they first came back to the ranch and bought we had a landscaping business at the time. And this can be tricky, and obviously family and business can be tricky, but it's always been successful for us. And so as long as those lines of communication are open and you have a good business plan, that can be successful. Obviously banks, this is not necessarily my expertise, but we refinanced our loan from grandma and granddad with a bank later down the line. And then other nonprofit lenders, just a couple examples. No Regrets Initiative is an initiative that we got connected with, which helped us finance the building that we recently built to host the improved market and grill. Before the grill was just a food truck, and now it's a full-fledged restaurant. And so they were able to, these types of lenders are people that are looking to invest in land or in, real tangible things. And that's the whole slow money movement from a few years ago. That was really popular, but that's still going on for sure. So finding, if you don't have access to, a line of credit with a bank or something, there are other options out there. Next slide. And then just some of the best management practices that we really identify, avoiding unnecessary infrastructure, large equipment, and any other inputs like that is really important to us. A lot of the times, keeping it as simple as possible is better. If you don't have to own a tractor, do not own a tractor. Like it's just a total money hole. And so when we're looking, if a family member does want to come back to the ranch and they propose a business plan to the family, these are some of the things we look at, because if you're able to simplify, it's just much more effective. And an example of that is there's a rancher or a farmer out in, I think, Arkansas, who he just has 1,000 acres, but which is, a drop in the bucket when it comes, is a large farm, but a drop in the bucket when it comes to our agricultural. And he went from using a ton of tilling and applying full chemistry, which just means all of the herbicides, pesticides, all the sides, to fully organic and very little tilling and very large equipment, only the bare minimum as far as equipment usage for harvesting his crops. And he did the calculation on how much he saved in that time frame of going from fully non-organic to organic and having fewer inputs. It's not necessarily about you're spending money with all of those things. And he is saving $1.2 million per year on this farm, which is just insane, because and still has very similar, if not higher, yields because of it. So the other thing we've identified is looking at the market you're entering and what demand you're addressing, because there are a lot of other small farmers that are starting up in the valley, which is super exciting. But seeing how some of them are succeeding or failing is really interesting and very telling. So if you see that farmers have done the market research and know that, okay, there's these restaurants in town that I can supply, and this is the type of restaurant, and I'm going to go to them beforehand and say, can I grow you, 10,000 pounds of carrots? Then that's a great use of that. And you have that all lined up and ready to go. Or, maybe you don't want to be the 8th vegetable producer in the valley, and you start a dairy of some sort. And that's what my uncle did when he first came back to the ranch. He looked at the different enterprises that were already there, and he said, okay, well, what's my niche and what can I fill? And he's the only raw milk dairy within a long ways of here, and has been very successful and is always running out of product because he has found this niche that there's a high demand for. And then finally, I'm going to hammer it home again, but that holistic goal is so important, because it allows you, especially in agriculture, you're dealing with ecosystems, and ecosystems are incredibly complex. And so making sure that you're looking as a bigger picture as possible, and that's what that holistic context lets you do, where you're looking at who are your decision makers. So if it's just you and you're the only one, but maybe it's other family members, who can pull the plug on this and who really has say. And for us, it's the majority of the family are decision makers.
So let's stop. Sorry about that, Abe. Sorry about that. Let's stop here. So I think, at least we got 98% of the way through. So we got to hear from the James Ranch, which is a really unique model for incorporating, now 2 generations back onto their ranch in really diverse enterprises. So next I'd like to invite up Kathy Riley, who's going to walk us through some of the obstacles and opportunities that she's seen practicing law here in Colorado, then working with intergenerational family transfers as well as succession planning that involves non-family members. And so Kathy is a sole practitioner in Loveland, Colorado. Her practice emphasis is to serve the agricultural and equine industries, including family farm and ranch issues and mediation throughout rural Colorado. She serves as a family farm transition facilitator through the Colorado Agricultural Mediation Program. She's a graduate of the University of Denver College of Law. And prior to private practice, she was the general counsel for the Colorado Department of Agriculture as an assistant attorney general. She also practiced law in Jackson County, Colorado, as a sole practitioner and the deputy district attorney, and as a major in the Judge Advocate General's Corps in the Colorado Army National Guard and the Army Reserves. And then there's a lot more to her bio, but she's eyeing me going, stop. So there's more. But I'd like to welcome Kathy up. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. I didn't have slides because I wasn't really sure what direction I might want to take and wanted to base that a little bit upon some of the presentations that you've heard prior to mine. The one thing that I really wanted to kind of talk about is these are some really innovative family transition kind of situations that you're hearing about, and they're working well. And they're working well because people want them to work well. They didn't have that one family member maybe who decided that, well, no, I see this farm or this ranch as being development potential. This is big bucks. I don't want to be involved in any kind of family farming or any kind of situation like that. So as a facilitator and as an attorney, we often see the sort of the failures of the system, and it's fun to work on those that actually do work forward. But I think the piece that lawyers need to understand, we've done a number of seminars on that within the Bar Association, is that just simple estate planning isn't going to cut it here, right? We can't have granddad say, I'm just going to write up a will and I'll give the farm to the 3 boys, they figure out what they're going to do with it. That's kind of the setup for failure. To do the transition planning, there are some documents, yes, estate planning we might do, but a lot of it is more of that communication skill of really talking through with the family, what's your vision? Like we're talking about the holistic vision. What is your vision for this property? How can we get you there? So that's kind of the role that I thoroughly enjoy. Some of the frustrations that you run into with that is often you might have, well, I'll give you just an example. It was a situation where the tenant farmer had farmed this particular land for an elderly woman for at least 15 or 18 of his years, and his father had done the same. So she really had never been the farmer. Her husband had years ago. Her son wasn't interested in farming at all. He enjoyed the fact that she wanted to stay on the farm, but the tenant farmer was going to be the one taking it over in this plan. The problem what we ran into is how do you finance that? Because the tenant farmer was not going to qualify on his own to be able to buy the property. The attorney for the elderly woman didn't want the property bought during her lifetime so that there would be not a taxable event. The son did not want to become a lender. So try to make that mesh together is kind of some of the more creative and frustrating kinds of things that I do run into. The other thing I did talk about is as far as having just a will where people try to split a piece of land 3 ways or 4 ways. That one invariably is an invitation for disaster. It either winds up with the family members fighting over which part they get, or they try to subdivide what was a nice piece of land into 4 little parcels, sometimes usually doing that without county approval, even if they needed it. Then they argue over who has the access road, and it just sort of develops into this disaster. The other funding piece is if you do have that one child maybe out of the inheritance who really is not interested in the farm, how is that parent going to be? And it's not really a fairness issue. It's not going to be an equal issue. It's more of a fairness issue. How can they be fair to that off-farm child, right? And sometimes that's some creative financing that comes into play, whether it would be creating an investment account for that child or buying life insurance that the child is a beneficiary of, trying to make the situation work. So that's just some kind of thoughts. And do you have questions, Martha, particularly?
Well, I think One of the things would be, what do you see as some of the biggest areas of risk then? You know, as you look at some of these beginning farmers that you've helped to incorporate into into an adherence plan or into a succession plan.
Okay. Yeah, and so biggest areas of risk that some of the young farmers coming on board run into, some of it is, and you've heard some of that even in what you've talked about this afternoon, we're not looking really at traditional farming models typically with the young farmers coming on board. Financially, they probably can't fund it in the first place. So there's a scaling back in a way of looking at a different type of production, maybe something that's more manageable on a smaller acreage. Sometimes they're taking on a facility where maybe the water had been primarily sold off to try to fund long-term care or, the prior owner's retirement or something like that. So there is a challenge in being able to express to a lender, and you've heard that as well, how is my operation going to work? No, it isn't traditional farming that you're all used to talking about, but it does have a viability, and we can make a feasible plan. And so I think some of that is probably one of the bigger challenges of how do you really develop your plan, how do you sell that plan?
Okay, great.
Well, anything else?
Yeah, I think that's great. And then we'll open it up
Okay.
for questions after.
Thank you.
Invite Becca up. Thank you, Kathy. All right. And next, we want to hear from Becca Jablonski, who is going to talk to us about some financing strategies and research that she has done, and I have been lucky enough to be a part of here at CSU. She is an associate professor and food systems extension economist in the Department of Ag and Resource Economics here at CSU. Her research and extension program has two primary components. So that's evaluating farm and ranch profitability impacts of sales through non-commodity markets, and then also assembling the community economic impacts of food systems policies, investments, and programs, including strategies focused on strengthening rural-urban linkages. So as part of her position, she's the co-director of CSU's Food Systems Institute and CSU's Food Systems Extension team, and she holds a PhD from Cornell University. So welcome, Becca.
Well, thanks, everybody. I hope everybody in this room is well aware of the fact that you are really making a difference for the next generation of farmers and ranchers. And so we are so excited to have you here at Colorado State University. So over the past couple years, I've been fortunate enough to work with an awesome team from the USDA Economic Research Service with Sarah Campbell, who's somewhere around here. She left. She was like, I don't want to hear this. I already know it. Sarah Campbell, who is our head of beginning farmers for USDA, with a colleague at the University of Minnesota and some folks here at Colorado State University, including Martha and our colleague Don Thilmany right there. And what we've been doing is really trying to answer what was required as part of the 2018 Farm Bill, which is to understand some of the profitability implications, right? What do we know about what it means to be a successful beginning farmer or rancher? And so we have a whole line of research we've been doing in this space, including some recommendations for the upcoming Farm Bill and ongoing Farm Bill discussions. So I encourage you to take a look, and I'll provide you some slides at the end where you can go for more information. We also have a few fact sheets we've been putting together there. Of course, if you want to read our peer-reviewed journal articles, I highly recommend that as well. Those are for the brave at heart. So we have a lot of information, but I know we don't have a lot of time today. So I'm going to focus on just two pieces. And the first is thinking about different types of beginning farmers and ranchers. And I think this is really important and something we really haven't talked about today. And if you actually look at what we see in the literature around beginning farmers and ranchers, the sort of overwhelming thing we see is that they are diverse, right? That there's lots of differences across that. And I'm sure you see that in the kinds of conversations that you're having. But one of the things that we want to point out is this distinction between what we call this all beginning. So this is where all of the primary operators in the farm classify as beginning operations. And that's compared to where we have any operator beginning. So that would be like the example that Roy provided or the example that Abe provided, right, where you're going to have kind of a multi-generational operation, and then where we have established operations. And really what we see, and I should mention for those of you who like to get a little nerdy, we use the USDA's ARMS data for this analysis, which is the Agricultural Resource Management Survey data. And it's really the best source of farm financial data that we have nationally. There are a number of caveats, including that it's congressionally mandated to focus in the core agricultural states. So if you want to talk about those, you can come talk to me, or Ben was having some fun talking about this last night. But when we use these data, what we see are that established operations and this any operator beginning look much more similar in a lot of ways than this all beginning, right? These all beginning operations likely have different types of needs, and I think Roberto talked about some of those different types of needs than a multi-generation operation. And we could have a lot more discussions about that, but I hope it's something that you all keep in mind. So here what we're actually looking at is the balance owed, right? So this is essentially the debt portfolio that we're seeing across these different types of operations. And I think what I wanted to highlight here for all of you is that if we look at the farm credit, those orange boxes there, what you see is that those all beginning operations owe or have a smaller percentage of their balance owed to you all relative to the other types of operations, right? And also if you look at those gray bars, what it's looking like is these all beginning operations are leveraging FSA debt more than they are farm credit. Now that we know that there's a lot of FSA programs out there, we could talk about getting into some more nuance there, but I think it's an interesting thing to highlight. So here we have the same classifications, but we've divided it by short-term and long-term debt, right? So short-term are where you're buying feed, things like that. Long-term are where you're actually buying land and those sort of long-term fixed assets. And so, we see some interesting differences here. And I'm just curious, looking out, you all are very well aware of the kinds of lending you're doing. Is there anything here that's a surprise to anybody? Anything anyone notices here? As researchers, we look at the data, but it's sometimes interesting to hear the perspective of the folks who are actually doing the work. I mean, I think one thing that we have talked about as researchers is that, the all beginning loans on average are smaller, right? That's probably what you'd expect. Those operations tend to be smaller. They tend to have less collateral, so they probably have less ability to borrow as much money. But there's some things here that, may be worth thinking about and considering. The other thing I wanted to talk about today is local food markets. And we've heard a little bit about that from some of the farmer panelists. But we see that local food markets are growing, and especially during the pandemic. And also we're seeing that this is a differentiation strategy that's being leveraged by many of our beginning operations. So unfortunately, this is from the census. The tabulation has not yet been conducted for the 2017 census, so I apologize, I'm showing you old information. But what we see is about a quarter of our beginning operations are certified organic, right, a differentiation strategy, or about a quarter are selling through local and regional food markets. And I would expect in the 2017 census that we're actually going to see that number go up. It'll be interesting to see what that looks like now in a sort of a post-pandemic environment where we saw increased interest in local food. So one thing to keep in mind about farms and ranches that sell through local food markets is that, and right here where we're not looking at beginning operations, we're looking at all local food markets, and we're looking at local food producers by scale. So we start really small, right, at under $75,000 in gross cash farm income, and we move up to over $1 million in gross cash farm income. And here we're looking at their variable expenses. And the only thing I want you to pay attention to here are these green bars. And what you're seeing is that as these local food operations get larger, a significantly larger share of their total variable expenses are devoted to labor. So this is the exact opposite in conventional agriculture, right? Where we're substituting capital for labor, right? We're getting bigger, we're buying a tractor, we're buying a bigger tractor. Here, there's continued and increasing reliance on labor. And so, this has, I think, some unique challenges, especially in an environment right now where we see that it's difficult to get labor and don't see any opportunities for that to get easier coming up down the pipeline. But what the good news is, if we think about rural development, is that at least from what we've seen using the ARMS data, is that these are higher wage jobs on average relative to commodity-oriented operations. But there's some really important things to think about here, right? These operations likely do and will have less collateral, right, because of that reliance on labor. So we've done some work trying to look at the profitability impacts of sales through these markets. And overall, sort of the big take-home message is that we see that these intermediated markets, and I should just step back for 1 second. When we talk about local food markets, we tend to talk about two types of markets. We talk about direct-to-consumer. So those are sales to farmers markets, roadside stands, freezer beef, right? The things that we tend to think about when we talk about local food. But at least based on the data we've seen recently, only about 1/3 of total local food sales move direct to consumer. And so 2/3 move either through retailers or farm to school or farm to institution. And in fact, we're seeing big incentives now coming out of USDA to support more of those sort of institutional market opportunities for farmers and ranchers. And I think the good news about that is that we see that those intermediated markets in general, on average, tend to be more profitable than direct-to-consumer markets alone. Now, this is not to say that there are some exceptions to that, but this is on average, right? And so one of the things we might think about, especially if you're coming in and you're looking at a business plan, is there a plan to maybe start at some of these direct markets, but then thinking about scaling up and at least trying to diversify that market portfolio for these local food operations? The other thing that I think is interesting we see, and this is when we look at the different types of local food markets, and again, divided by scale, is that once you get over $350,000 in gross cash farm income, we see that over half of all operations are profitable, right? So this is a really good sign. We see that all those operations on average are profitable. And actually, some of the rate of return on assets looks pretty good for some of these top performing operations. So to close here, I just wanted to give a few considerations for the farm credit system. One is that there are these key differences across types of beginning operations. So thinking about, right, our beginning operations that are retirees versus young folks versus the folks that are all new in these operations, closer to cities, in rural areas, they all have different needs. And so I think, as Gary was saying earlier today, really trying to go and listen to folks and meet them where they are, because they all really do have different needs, and we want to try to be supportive of the, I think, increasingly diversified models that we're going to see moving forward for beginning farmers and ranchers. And that these all beginning operations in particular, right, may need to figure out ways to differentiate themselves. And we're seeing, I think, just some really innovative models that are out there and increasing subsidy coming from the federal government to support some of these markets, both in terms of the infrastructure and in terms of a growing number of programs, right, like we continue to see innovations happening with the whole farm revenue program, so insurance opportunities. Also keep in mind, right, that these operations are going to require more labor, especially as they get larger. And so if you see a business plan, right, that isn't sort of thinking about that, that's something you may want to have discussions about, that there are lower levels of collateral, and that even though we're seeing that there are innovations happening by RMA in the local food space, that they still don't have access to the number of insurance programs and risk management strategies from a traditional sort of USDA perspective as more conventional operations. The importance of investment in infrastructure, right? It's really hard for some of these operations to access more of the traditional market opportunities. So just as an example, we have a local foods distributor here in Fort Collins that's actually trying to work with small and mid-scale producers. And even she requires that before she'll take on a new client, that they have at least 10 wholesale clients that they're already working with, right? So thinking about some of that infrastructure to help get them started, right? And that farmers markets, even if they're not going to be profitable off the bat, may help to develop some of those business skills and relationships. And that reaching mid-scale does seem to be that important marker, right? That about $350,000 in gross cash farm income, we do see differences across that line. So with that, yes, go and check out our cool fact sheets, and you can visit our website, localfoodeconomics.com, for lots of the research that we're doing here. And we also have a website here at Colorado State on some of the food systems work we're doing. So thanks so much.
Awesome. All right, well, thank you. So I thought before I ask a couple of questions, it would be nice to open it up and see if there were questions from you all that you wanted to ask of our panelists, and hopefully we can connect with Abe here also. So are there any questions from the floor? Yeah. Sure.
For Kathy, I know planning sooner than later is best when you're talking about the succession, but how much discussion do you give to like end-of-life care for the mother and the father, and how do you broach that subject?
And that is a great question because it's an all-enveloping conversation. A lot of times we're planning on what happens if the parents need to be in long-term care. Has there been any kind of plan for that? So you're not only looking at what happens with the farm, but you're looking at what happens with the people on the farm. And that's a big portion of that. Sometimes that's, I also teach at CSU, so I talk with students about, how do you open up that conversation? What does that look like? And maybe it just is amounting to sitting down at dinner and saying, gee, Dad, what's going to happen? You're starting to have some issues of being able to stay up with the farm. What are you thinking? And see if you can get it opened up for discussion. If not, the facilitator's role, at least through the ag mediation program, is we can come do that for you. We can do kind of a little family facilitative session and start to broach some of those subjects that are a little harder to talk about. Did I answer your question? Okay. Do you still have other questions on that? Okay.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. Are there other questions? Yeah.
Becca, if you had a magic data wand, one that would be anonymous as well as able to go through any firewall imaginable, what data would you want from Farm Credit?
Oh gosh, that's really, really exciting. So, right, and something I've had some conversations with Chris about over the years. So one of the challenges for us working with the ARMS data, especially thinking about market differentiation strategies, is that, as I mentioned, the ARMS is congressionally mandated to focus in the core agricultural states. So we miss out on a lot of the richness of the data about where more differentiation is occurring, right? Because as you can think about, we see overall that there are many more local food markets in urban places. And we see opportunities then to support more rural-urban linkages. And like just as an example, who's ever been to the New York City green market system, a farmer's market in New York City? Couple people. So in the Union Square Farmers Market on a Saturday in October, you get 400,000 people who walk through that farmers market. 400,000 people. So when we've done studies of farmers in those markets, some of them decided to go into farming because they saw a market opportunity through that market, right? That's not what we see most of the time in conventional agriculture, and not in a place like Colorado where we have much smaller populations. So what I would love to see is more of this richness of the data, both in terms of, the different types of borrowers, right? So different types of YBS borrowers, and then also where the revenue is coming from, right? So if we can sort of track, because what we would like to do a better job of that we don't really have the ability to do is to track some of those expenses with some of the markets, right? But I would love to have more conversations about this because I think there's a lot of opportunities.
Did that work, Gary? It did? Awesome. Okay. Other questions for our panelists? Okay, I don't see any. Well, Abe, I wanted to ask you then, so you have a really good structure in terms of onboarding businesses, you have some self-financing, but if you were to look beyond the James Ranch and kind of the technical assistance that you have internally, what would really help you as a multi-generational set of enterprises in terms of outside technical assistance as you're looking at onboarding new enterprises or expanding existing ones?
That's a great question. Can you all hear me?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay. Well, let's see. That's I haven't really thought about that. I think yeah, I think for us right now, we're experiencing more demand than we can handle. But if we weren't experiencing that, I think resources and how to, because there's a lot of ranches that have been successful, ranches and farmers that have been successful going into the online marketplace where, and some have really knocked that out of the park. But I know that, and some ranchers and farmers who don't have the customer base that we have, and we're close enough to Durango, which is just 17,000, but we have enough of a clientele that we are constantly getting requests for shipping and things like that. And so if we had enough product, I think knowing how to step into that marketplace as far as search engine optimization and those types of tools would be really helpful, especially for ranchers who are in more rural settings who might not be able to get to the farmer's market, or it's 7 hours to drive to the nearest large farm market.
Great. All right. Well, thank you for that, responding that surprise question there. I appreciate that. All right. Well, the timer is telling me that we are now over. So I know we have one more speaker. So I'd like to just thank our panelists, both Abe from Durango as well as Becca and Kathy, for coming up and sharing information with us today. So thank you.
Our next speaker is going to be thrilled to hear that we had beef brisket for lunch. He leads the country's oldest and largest national trade organization, the National Cattlemen's Association. By the way, I am a member. He's got a long history of policies on the Hill. He's an Aggie, Texas A&M. Maybe you can explain how CSU used to be Aggies, but now they're Rams. Maybe that's a political conversation we shouldn't get into, right? Okay. Well, it's my pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to introduce Colin Woodall of the National Cattlemen's Association.
All right. Good afternoon. How's everybody? You know, we wait till the end of the day and we put sustainability on the agenda. That's awfully tough to swallow. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. Again, my name's Colin Woodall. I am the Chief Executive Officer of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. And we are the oldest and largest national trade association representing the entire spectrum of the American cattle and beef business. But our focus is on producers. And 95% of our membership are going to be backgrounders, seed stock operators, cow-calf producers, stockers, and feeders. The boots on the ground producers who are working every day to take care of those cattle and make them ready for the market. Our membership is focused on that group. Our leadership comes from that group. But in order for us to be able to truly serve that group, we have to have insights into the entire beef supply chain. So that's why the remaining 5% are going to be made up of supporting organizations and suppliers and different groups within the entire beef supply arena. So everything from John Deere to McDonald's, from Longhorn Steakhouse to our support we get from the Farm Credit System. And we need to have all of this input because that's the only way that we're going to be effective advocates for America's cattle producers. And when we talk about being an effective advocate, we have to address the issue of sustainability. Now, typically when I talk to a room full of cattle producers, and I bring up sustainability, I get one of three reactions. I get those producers to say, yes, finally, we're talking about this. We need to take a leadership role. Where have you been, NCBA? Then I get those, put their arms up, say, by God, here we are. We're talking about sustainability again. And all you want is the government to come in and put more rules and restrictions on me. I'm not going to listen to you. And then you get those whose eyes kind of glaze over and they pull out their phone and they start looking at the markets or what bulls are going to buy next. All three are acceptable responses because of the way we've treated this issue over the years. As an industry and as a trade association, we've kind of put our toe in and we've jumped back down. We've talked around the edges. We've talked around the fringe of sustainability, but we never really took it on. In a lot of cases, I think our members expected it to be another fad. Now we're going to talk about sustainability for a while, and then we'll just go back to doing what we need to do. Sustainability is not going away. It is here to stay. Now, the last thing we want to do is get into a debate on climate change with a bunch of cattle producers, right? Because it's going to be a long, drawn-out, very heated exchange. We have stepped away from that and said, doesn't matter what you may think about climate change in general. What matters is the number of people who are asking questions about what we do on cattle farms and ranches across the United States, including Congress, including the president, including international groups, and the consumer, who is asking more and more, where does my beef come from? And how did it get to the plate? So we came to an agreement as an association that this is not going away, that the sustainability discussion is here to stay, and instead of seeing it as a threat, instead of seeing it as somebody trying to add more red tape to what we do, we decided, let's approach this as an opportunity. Let's approach this as an opportunity to tell our story. Because if we don't tell our story, nobody else is going to. And that helped us change the mindset of the members of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association and realize that, yes, indeed, this was a good opportunity for us. And for years, we have talked about, hey, tell your story. We have a good story. Tell your story. That's great if people want to listen. A lot of times people didn't want to listen. But now we are seeing more and more consumers who are interested in hearing about what we're doing. So that's why NCBA has made this a priority. In fact, one of our strategic priorities, and why we have spent so much time talking about our need to be a leader in the discussion of sustainability on cattle farms and ranches here in the United States. Now, what is sustainability? That's the first question we had to ask, because you talk to any individual in this room, I guarantee every single one of you is probably going to have a different definition of what sustainability means to you. And that was always one of the challenges that we dealt with, is there really never was a clear mindset on the definition. So we said, all right, we needed to define it ourselves. So we've broken it into three pillars when it comes to sustainability of the beef industry. The first is the one that you would expect, environmental sustainability. The impact that we have on the environment, what we are doing as an industry to take good care of our natural resources. But interestingly enough, when we go out and we survey the consumer and we ask the consumer, what does beef sustainability mean to you? 45% say caring for the animal, not the environment. We'll add that to the discussion here in just a moment. Environmental sustainability, our overall impact, that's an easy one. But for us as an industry, if we are not profitable as operators, as producers, and we can't stay on that land, then it doesn't matter what we can or can't do for the environment if we can't keep that land in green space. And as you look around here in the Front Range of Colorado, every former farm and ranch that comes up for sale is not being purchased by another farmer and rancher. It's being purchased by a developer. And we all know that that first crop of houses that land grows is the last crop that that land will ever grow. So we have to make sure that our producers have that chance to be profitable, because that's the only way we're going to keep them on the land and ultimately be able to showcase the great work that we do to protect our natural resources. We also have to keep in mind that it's not just the profitability of that operation, it's also about keeping farmers and ranchers in their local communities. Because when you look at the PTAs at the schools, when you look at the church boards, when you look at the scout leaders, when you look at the involvement in all of these local communities that all of you serve and are a part of, it's farmers and ranchers that step up and help lead these rural communities. And so in order for us to keep our rural communities vibrant, we have to have farmers and ranchers there. We have to have them profitable and have to keep them in the mix. Then there is also the pillar of social sustainability. What do we as an industry owe everybody that we work with? Our workers, whether that's a farm worker, whether that's a worker in the packing plant, we as producers have to be aware that their health, their welfare, their well-being is key to our success. And we saw that throughout the entire COVID pandemic, especially those of us in the beef industry. When packing plants, one just a few miles down the road here, where workers were showing up every day, they were getting sick every day, and because they were getting sick, we, as the producers, got hit with the low prices. We have to make sure we're taking care of them. We have to talk about our commitment to animal welfare. Back to my earlier point, when you ask the consumer, what is beef sustainability to them? Animal welfare, taking care of that animal. And as you could see, many other things, including the value that we bring to tourism and, again, local economies. So that's how we, as the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, look at sustainability and how we want to define sustainability. Now let's get into some of the facts. Many of you have probably heard about the United Nations Livestock's Long Shadow Report. Remember the Livestock's Long Shadow Report, where the UN came in and said that the world's livestock emit more greenhouse gases than all the world's transportation does. And everybody lost their mind. Oh my goodness, how can that be? How can anybody have a conscience and still eat beef or meat in general? Now, what we discovered is they didn't quite do the math right. Dr. Frank Bentloner at the Clear Center at the University of California in Davis stepped up and he took on the United Nations and said, you guys just didn't do this right. And so it shot a lot of holes in that and bought us some additional time to get out there and tell our story. But unfortunately, once something's out there, especially if it's put out by the United Nations, people are going to continue to reference it. And that's what we have seen. Even today, we have activist groups that come out and use that little tidbit that we produce more greenhouse gases than the world's transportation sector as a way to advance their attacks on us as a beef industry. So we have spent a lot of time focused on getting the facts out there. And one of those is that as an industry, we are committed to continual improvement. The cattle industry of today is not the cattle industry of 1898 when NCBA was founded. We're not the cattle industry of 5 years ago. And the cattle industry today is not going to be the same that it is in 5, 10, 15, or 20 years. It's that commitment to continual improvement that allows us to get better and to provide opportunities for our producers. And we've been able to showcase that. going to throw a lot of facts at you. And the reason why is because I want to arm you with some of this stuff so you can take it back out with you and use it to help push back on some of the questions and the unfounded attacks that we have against us as a cattle industry. We have the lowest greenhouse gas emissions since 1996 in the world. Our carbon footprint, you see that 10 to 50 times lower than other regions of the world because of our production practices, because of our investment in things like better genetics. Looking at how each animal performs and taking that genetic selection into account as we improve our herds and produce more beef with fewer animals. And it shows that when it takes, on average, 2.66 more cattle to produce what we can do here in the United States. And from 1961 to 2018, we have already reduced our emissions per pound of beef by more than 40% while producing 60% more beef per animal. It didn't take EPA to tell us to do this. It didn't take Congress to tell us to do this. It didn't take the United Nations Food and Ag Organization to tell us to do this. We did this on our own. We did this because we knew it was going to continue to make our industry better. So when it comes to that overall commitment to the environment, to our natural resources, when it comes to sustainability, we've already been there. It's just a matter of being able to tell the story and get the facts out there so people understand exactly what's going on. And if the world was efficient as us, the rest of the world was efficient as us, we could double beef production. Isn't that an amazing statistic? We often get tagged with being a part of destroying the rainforests. We have to be very clear that what we've done here in the United States is great, but there are livestock systems around the world that need improvement. And you know what? We want to help them. Our genetics, our production practices, it's not something that we're just keeping in our pocket and saying, nope, 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 that's just for American producers. We want to share this. We want to share the technology because as long as there's an attack on what's going on in Brazil, it's going to be an attack on us. We can't compartmentalize or regionalize these attacks. We have to know that any attack on the beef industry when it comes to climate change, when it comes to sustainability, is ultimately an attack on us as American producers. And we produce 18% of the world's beef with just 6% of the world's cattle. Great statistics, great facts. Ones that when you get out there into the discussion, cause people to pause a little bit and go, I didn't know that. I'm sure at least one of these is something that you didn't know coming in to this discussion today. And I hope that you can take that back out with you and help tell that story because these facts are critical. The U.S. cattle producer is committed to being a better producer, regardless of what the government tells us to do. Now, it's not just production facts. It's also what we see from reporting of greenhouse gases. EPA, beef cattle are only responsible for 2% of greenhouse gas emissions. Now, people always say, well, wait a minute, there's more to it than that. We don't just look at you. You have a lot of other things that come into making those cattle. Yes, we do. That's why we add in there when you take in feed, fuel, electricity, everything that goes into producing that animal, it still only pops up to 3.7% of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. And all of ag is only hovering around 10%. But when you look at electricity, when you look at transportation, there's just no comparison. That's why that livestock's long shadow has been one that we've had to just get out and fight against because it's just flat wrong. Now, it also doesn't help that we have a lot of experts in Congress that talk about cow farts, right? Green New Deals, I wish they just knew what end of the cow did what, because we all know that we're not talking about what's coming out the back end. We're talking about what's coming out the front end, thanks to rumination. And that's why we have an office in Washington, D.C., is to take on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and other groups and make sure that they know that, one, you just have to understand what the animal really does, and then try to supplement it with the facts that we have about greenhouse gas emissions. Now, let's be clear. Methane is a very potent greenhouse gas. And as a part of rumination, our cattle expel a lot of methane. We had to come to grips with that, to say, yes, we do emit greenhouse gases. Our only ask was to make sure that we were much more accurate in the way that we talked about them, we measured them, and ultimately understood how they compared to other industries. And that leads us to the discussion of how methane has been treated in the past. As I said, it is a potent gas, and one that comes out of the front end of our animals, gets up in the atmosphere. But the thing is, the way that methane has been measured for years now was the same way they were measuring fossil carbon. And that is, it went up in the atmosphere and it stayed. It stayed. And when you look at it that way, through what was called the GWP 100, GWP stands for global warming potential, then yeah, it made us look really, really bad. But then some researchers in Oxford in the United Kingdom came up with a new methodology that much more accurately reflects how methane behaves in the atmosphere. Because methane does not go up and stay. Methane goes up, it spends anywhere from 10 to 12 years, and then through process in the atmosphere, comes back down in the form that can be utilized by plants through photosynthesis to once again grow the grass that our cattle need in order to produce that great tasting beef. Now that's a game changer for us. It's a game changer because we now know the impact of methane from cattle is not as severe as once thought. Is it an issue? Absolutely. And we've admitted that, yes, we emit methane gas. Is it as bad as what we had anticipated? No, it's not. Now, here's a great way to think about it. Think about a bathtub, okay? If you have a bathtub, you're pouring water in the bathtub, and the drain is open. If it's draining at the same level that it's filling, level in the bathtub's going to stay the same spot, right? Now, if you slow the fill of the tub and drains at the same rate, your level is going to go down. The opposite happens, and you increase the fill rate of the tub, it'll start to fill up. That is where we have GWP star, Global Warming Potential Star. This is the methodology that came out of Oxford that said when you look at that way that methane behaves in only spending 9 to 12 years in the atmosphere, it's like that bathtub. And depending on the number of cattle, you will see that rate go up and down. And we know that we do not have the same herd size that we did 50 years ago. And given what we're seeing with drought throughout the country right now, the herd size continues to dwindle. So that methane in the atmosphere due to us also fluctuates. So when you use that as the measurement, then that gives us much more opportunity to talk about how we can ultimately become climate neutral rather than just, and be a part of the solution rather than just being a part of the problem. These last ones are ones that I really like to talk about. Because you hear about, well, if everybody just went vegan, it'd be no problem, right? We'd solve all the issues. Look at that. If all livestock in the United States, were eliminated and every American followed a vegan diet, we would only reduce greenhouse gases by 2.6%. Is that really going to change the dynamic of this discussion? We have to ask ourselves that. And when you look at where we stand versus transportation, it's clear that we are not the same level of problem that they are. And just avoiding one transatlantic flight would save twice the amount of carbon as eating a plant-based diet for an entire year. As cattle producers, that makes us feel pretty good because we can hold our heads up high and said, yeah, we're doing the right thing. Matter of fact, if you pulled in a bunch of students off the campus here and put them in a side room and said, all right, students, if we were able to design a food manufacturing system that was solar powered, it was mobile without the use of fossil fuels, it self-replicated, and it took foodstuffs that were of no value to a human and turned it into high-quality protein, what would you think about that? Would you invest? Yeah. That sounds awesome. It's exactly what President Biden promised us. We have it. It's called the cow. God gave us the ruminant a long time ago, and that's exactly what it does. It is solar powered. It self-replicates. It can move around without fossil fuels. And it can take grass and forages that are of zero use to us and turn it into a juicy ribeye. Think about that lunch you had today. That used to be grass. And in that form, it was useless to you. But that ruminant stomach did its magic, and here we are. Telling that story has been a game changer for us because there's no question that climate is and will continue to be a priority for the president. We've had multiple conversations with he and his staff in the White House, with USDA, with EPA about their goals. And by changing the way that we engage and by showing that we're willing to come to the table and talk and that we're not just giving them the Heisman and the stiff arm saying, oh, we're not going to talk about climate with you. We're not going to talk about sustainability with you. We've said we absolutely want to talk about sustainability with you. We've been able to change their opinion of us and remain at that table. And as of right now, we don't have any new rules or regulations that have been put upon us in regards to greenhouse gases, because we've been able to put the facts out there and make it very clear that we're serious about what we do, we're serious about what we want to do to help, and we're going to continue to find ways to get better as an industry. So that led us to setting some goals. We put together a working group of NCBA members from across the United States. We made them meet at least once, sometimes 3 times a week for almost 6 months. We brought in experts. We brought in scientists. We looked at the data. We looked at the facts, and we said, what are we going to do as an industry? We said, we're going to set goals. Because if we're going to be taken serious in this discussion, we've got to set some goals. So just about 8 months ago, we passed this as part of NCBA's policy. We put in place the beef industry sustainability goals. Let's go through each one of these. Demonstrate climate neutrality of the U.S. cattle industry and our cattle production by 2040. We cannot do that right now. We can't do it. But you look at GWP STAR and what it means in trying to reset the way that we account for methane, and you look at all the research that's going on right now. research into corn varieties that help reduce methane. New management practices. We know that by 2040, we believe that we can hit this target because of all of the effort that's being put into it. Research, the adoption of GWP STAR, and looking at additional government programs, especially as we start the discussion on a new farm bill, knowing quite clearly that sustainability and climate will be a critical component of that particular farm bill. This is doable. And it's doable not with cowboy math, okay? Not with Aggie math either. This is doable by talking to the researchers themselves. We've had rooms full of PhDs and climate scientists who have looked at this, and they told us, because we didn't want to go out there and we didn't want to put out some sort of fluffy goal just to put out a goal in hopes of getting people to say, oh, they are serious about it. We wanted to put something out that truly was achievable. And with GWP STAR and with the research that is going on today and more research to come, the researchers, the PhDs, the scientists told us, yes, we're going to have to work hard, to work really hard, but this is achievable. We also have to look at the other components of sustainability. Enhance the trust in cattle producers as being those good stewards of not only the environment, but their animals, and demonstrate what we do in animal care. Animal care is a key component of NCBA's existence because of the Beef Quality Assurance Program, BQA. BQA has been a very popular program over the years, and the purpose of BQA is to make our producers better in producing cattle and taking care of the health and the welfare of our animals. But not every NCBA member and not every cattle producer in the country is BQA certified yet. We have to promote more education. We have to get these BQA certifiers or certifications in place in order to make sure that we are living up to this commitment and doing everything we can to ensure those animals are not only healthy, but very well cared for. And those of you who are cattle producers, those of you who serve cattle producers, you know quite clearly that that is something that we are committed to. There's always one or two bad apples that we've got to make sure that get in front of BQA, and we're going to continue to push for that. We also have a program called the Environmental Stewardship Awards Program, ESAP. This is something where we have nominees from across the country, NCBA members, and we look at what they're doing on their operations. NCBA is divided up into 7 regions across the United States, and there's a winner for each one of those regions, and then ultimately there is a national winner that is chosen. And every year that program identifies producers who are doing some great new and novel things on their place that help not only animal welfare, but the environment. Including a winner not too long ago that was up the Hudson River from New York City. His entire operation was in the watershed of the city's water supply. And if any of you have been to New York City, you know New York City has the best drinking water around. There's something about it. I've always been amazed at how good New York's drinking water is, and they're pretty proud of it. And they protect that with many different security protocols, safety protocols, environmental protocols. And the fact that we can have cattle producers out there in their watershed shows the value of cattle production in bettering the resources, not sullying the resources. So allowing us to take those producers and showcase them in Gotham magazine and put them on the news in New York City really helps us share the great message of cattle production. Improve the safety, the quality of our workforce, and the well-being. I mentioned it earlier. If we don't have workers that we're taking care of, then we as producers are going to be the ones that suffer. So BQA also goes into how you take care of your people. And in taking care of your animals, you're also going to take care of your people. You know, last thing you want is somebody to get kicked in the chute, right? Or in a pen. BQA helps with that. But we're also looking at how we can partner with other groups to look at mental health, hunger, housing, everything that we need to take care of workers in the entire beef supply chain. In fact, working right now with the University of Nebraska, their School of Medicine, to see what we can do to look at the needs of feedlot workers and what we as an industry can possibly do more in to make sure that we're taking good care of them. We have to show efforts in taking care of the producers and their ability to be profitable. And that does get harder and harder, but it is telling this story. Making sure that the consumer feels like they have the permission to eat our product. While COVID was just a heck of a mess across the world, for us, there was a bit of a silver lining, and that was the consumer quite clearly showed us they love our product. We were getting photographs sent to us from across the United States, photographs from meat cases where the beef was cleaned out. Wasn't a package of beef to be found. Many of you experienced that yourselves. But what's always neat is to see the ones that right next to it was a fully stocked case of Beyond product. Right? Because before we got to the pandemic, we thought Beyond was going to be the one that was going to take us out. But given a time of uncertainty when Americans just wanted a little comfort, wanted a little safety, they ran to us. That makes us feel really good. And it helps build that permission to eat more product and to take these facts and know that they don't have to apologize for being a beef eater. We also want to look at packing capacity. We need more packers. We don't necessarily need more big packers. We need more regional, local packers. That's why we've worked very closely with USDA and been very supportive of the Secretary's efforts to get more money out there to increase our packing capacity. We have packing capacity. When one plant shuts down, we have some alternatives. It helps cattle producers. We also want to continue our education on grazing management tools and knowing how to utilize things such as mob or rotational grazing, and then also look at what more can be done in terms of the ecosystem or carbon markets. We're doing a really good job of taking care of, in a lot of cases, native grassland that has never seen a plow. And you look at places like Ohio, for example, West Virginia, where reclaimed mine sites are now very profitable cattle operations. We need to be able to make sure that producers are getting the most out of that. So those are the goals, the beef industry sustainability goals. To make sure that we're telling the story, we're taking care of the producers, giving the consumers what they want, and doing it without the government telling us to do it. So I appreciate the opportunity to be with you here today. We've got a couple of minutes left, so I'd be more than happy to take any questions anybody might have. Yes, sir.
How's the dairy cattle factor into all your numbers?
The dairy cattle are actually in a better spot because of the way that they can manage manure. So we do know that when you look at beef cattle and dairy cattle, just given our production systems, they have a much better opportunity and are already ahead of us in managing manure, managing greenhouse gases, in a lot of cases being able to capture that gas because they're under roof and using that to fuel their operations. So we're trying to follow their lead to some extent and see what more we can do in beef production to capture some of that. Because right now, when you look at a feedlot, it's all up in the air. And we're looking, and that's going to be one of the areas of research and innovation and development we think has some promise for us. But the dairy guys are doing better than we are right now. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to say thank you to everyone here today. We've learned so much. The Native American Agriculture Fund is entering into this credit space, and we've had a lot of mentors along the way. I'm seeing some of them in the audience. But one of the things that Native Americans do and do very well, and we're the first cattle producers in the country, is engage in farming and ranching in this cattle space. 75% of Native American farmers and ranchers are in cattle. They exist in $2.1 billion annually in the 2017 census, but also a majority of the consolidated land that all producers are going to end up looking towards is that exists in Indian country. 6% of the land that is in cow-calf operation exists on tribal lands. We also possess water rights. So one of the things that I wanted to ask, so the Intertribal Agriculture Council has their own label, and that is the Regen Nation label. And one of the things that drives us is industry. It's the consumer. So forget Congress. What does your consumer want? That's who we adhere to. And we know that the new younger producers, the new younger consumers, they're cognizant of sustainability. I was just actually noticing, I live a subsistence lifestyle. I hunt for my own fish, my own game, and that's what my family lives on throughout the year. But the other day we wanted some steak. So I go to the grocery store and I saw a sustainability label and I thought that's so interesting. But one of the things that we hear from our producers is they're tired of the labels. They're tired of having to buy into all these different labels. They want one shining star label, and it's always going to change because it's non-GMO, it's organic one year, but now it's sustainability. If we can collectively work together in this agricultural space to unburden the producer from having to purchase all of this, and NCBA being one of the leaders in this space, that would be wonderful for our producers. But I also wanted to say, this is not a political issue. Agriculture, meat, food, we all need that to survive. So we shouldn't make it a political issue. And if we have somebody on opposing party lines, let's educate them and not call them out in public spaces. Because I know in my experience working in USDA and traveling all across Indian country, which is all across the United States, some of my biggest allies and partners were people who we wouldn't necessarily be in the same voting box, but we understand the importance of our producers and our environment. Thanks.
I like your point about the label, because we're with you on that. We don't want this to be a niche market. We want this to be the entire beef market. And it's back to all the facts and figures we put up there. We can do that. We can already do that today in talking about the success we've had. And as we have more developments, that's one that we'll all be able to hang our hat on. Any other questions? Well, I'll leave you with one final term that you can take out and share. If you haven't heard this before, it's called upcycling. Not recycling, upcycling. And upcycling is what the cattle industry does. We take foodstuffs that are of zero value to us as humans and monogastrics, and we turn it into a high-quality protein, and at the same time, those cattle, which are solar-powered, mobile, without using fossil fuels, can self-replicate. When they're out there, they're improving that rangeland too. That cloven-hooved animal helps keep the range healthy, and much more so than any sort of strip mall or development. So thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity. If you have any questions, come holler at me. Thank you.
Hey, we're bringing the day to a close, and I was just kind of reflecting a little bit, thinking about things we learned. You know, upcycling is something that was an aha moment for me. I thought a little bit about that, then I tried to relate it to bicycling, and I don't know if I'm there, but I understand what you mean when you say that, and that's something that was an aha moment for me that'll help me describe and tell the story of agriculture. So Mr. Woodall, I think that's a real important aha moment that I had. What I'd like to do is I just want to get 2 or 3 aha moments that you heard today. Maybe it was something that made you think about things just a little differently than you did before. Or maybe it's something you want to take back with you. Or maybe it's something we'll talk about when we get to the New Belgium Brewery in just a little bit, that aha moment. Let me hear it from the crowd. What's an aha moment that you have? We got microphones that are going around. And I want you to know there are former students of mine in this audience right now. They will be called on to provide an aha moment. So you may need to bail them out just a little bit. What's an aha moment that we take away from our YBS conference today? I saw you writing things down.
One of the aha moments that I had was, I forget which panelist discussed all of the philanthropies that are interested in supporting these efforts, whether they're community-driven or industry-driven or ESG-driven, but the partnership opportunities with those different philanthropies, partnering up with lending institutions, that was a aha moment for me.
Hey, that's terrific. Thank you for that. It reminds me, too, to think about farmers and ranchers as asset managers was an aha moment. It came from that same session that we had when we did that. What's another aha moment maybe from this side of the room this time? I know you had the better view. We were talking about crickets earlier. That's the sound right now, right? The sound of crickets as people are trying to remember their aha moment. What's another aha moment from over here?
When the panel was talking about how they serve the different markets within their regions, I thought it was interesting that there were so many trends of what we all do to serve that next generation of agriculture, but yet we do it in such a specialized way depending on the market that we're serving. And I thought that was something that came out during that panel.
Hey, that's terrific. I think that's right. Anticipating a little bit of trends is really important as well as you think about what that's going to be for you. I think that's a great aha moment. One last one. What's an aha moment that we can close out on? Hey, I love that we had somebody in the back do that.
Hi, Katrina Clark, Farm Credit Administration. And I think a really cool aha for me is we use terms and we assume that people understand what we're talking about. And so I like the expanded definition of sustainability. It's really important when we're talking about a term to be sure that we have agreement on exactly what it is we're talking about when we say something. So not just assuming, because we know what happens when we assume, rather really getting clarity about exactly what it is we're talking about.
Hey, that's a terrific aha moment. And that implies engagement too, which helps us to move things forward, which is what this conference is a lot about, finding the ways that we'll be able to do that. Well, another aha moment for me as we close this out is gosh, really the great contributions that you've made and the dedication that you have that brought you here today. And I think that when you're alone, you're working on a problem, you get down in the trees, you don't always get to see the big picture of what things are about. But when we get together collectively and we work on things and we build together, that's an aha moment, because that means we're in something together for the good, for the common good. So thank you. Thank you for your contributions.